Hello, everyone. This is FIDE Master Victor Neustroev, and thank you for coming to our next webinar. Today, we are going to talk about when to transition the position to the end game. So the webinar is when to transition to the end game. This is the title of our webinar today. So I prepared a few games today to analyze and to decide when we should pass the game to the end game. Okay, guys. So we are waiting for more people to join, but before we start, I would like you to answer this question. So what do you think? In which cases we should pass the game to the end game? Who knows? What should happen to the position? In which type of the position, maybe? Just anything that comes to your mind. Yeah, you can unmute yourself and yeah, you can unmute yourself and explain why you think so. For example, Paul suggests when winning. Well, when winning, but what kind of advantage you mean? Uh, is it material advantage? Is it positional advantage or what? Because sometimes stable advantage. Well, not obligatory. Yeah, let me comment all these. All these declarations that you have here. When you have the end game, when you know the end game is winning. Well, yes, if you know the end game is winning, then you definitely should pass the game to the end game. Of course, if there is no simpler way to win the game right away. That's right. So this is well, I would agree with Brian. As for John's and Paul's statements, I have to clarify them a little. Just to give me a sec. I'll do it. Okay, so yeah, I want to see the list of participants as well as the list of um, at least have as the meeting chat. So when we should exchange queens, when we should pass the game into the end game. So there are three basic situations. One is when we would like to simplify the position in order to realize our material advantage. For example, we have extra pawn, we have extra exchange, well, or more material, and we would like to win the game without any complications. We want to avoid blunders. Because it's very often when you have advantage, when you have material advantage, but your opponent, as a compensation, has some initiative. Or maybe instead of initiative, he has the attack on your king, or maybe there is no initiative at the moment, but you think that he potentially may create initiative here. So this is where you may exchange queens and just simplify the position in order to realize it. Of course, if you see you're winning, you have extra rook, and you have a very strong attack, you shouldn't exchange the queens. You are more likely to win the game faster if you don't do it. So this is the first, when you have material advantage. Second is when you think it's easy to realize positional advantage in the end game. Then you should pass the game to the end game. Well, it can be a positional grind. Yeah, for example, when your opponent doesn't know how to play and without queens on the board, his opportunities will be even more limited. Then yes, so you may pass the game to the end game. What else? Well, you have a better pawn structure, and you see by exchanging the queens, you have an opportunity to, let's say, attack his pawns. That does make sense a lot. Also, for example, when the queens are on the board, you cannot use your king. But if, let's say, you exchange the queens, pass the game to the end game, and then you see that you're winning because your king is better centralized and can enter the enemy camp, for example. So there are different types of the positional advantage that can be realized in the end game, but it doesn't mean that every time you have a positional advantage, you should exchange the queens, because sometimes your positional advantage is based on the coordination of your queen with other pieces. And if you exchange queens, you may lose this positional advantage. And of course, the last one, the main one, I think it's about the attack. When your king is under attack and there is a risk that your king can be checkmated, or you would have to sacrifice some material in order to defend your king's position, then it does make sense to exchange the queens and if not pass the game to a winning game, at least avoid more complications which happens with queens on the board. So even if the end game is worse for you, you may still exchange the queens, just not to get checkmated. Okay. Paul, do you want to add something? Okay, looks like not. Oh, okay. Okay, let me mute you. But guys, you can unmute and ask some questions if you have any. So what we're gonna work on? So let's start with the first way of when we should exchange pieces, when we want to convert our material advantage. And I have my notes here, so let me open it. So the first game that we would like to talk about is the game between again. So it's no, I think it's not this one. It's this one against Canadian Master Duncan Suttles and Vasily Smyslov. So let's quickly go through the game. I just explain what happened. So it was King's Gambit. Well, both players didn't do their best because this is often happens in King's Gambit. So that time the theory wasn't uh, so well discovered. C6. So well, nowadays people capture with the knight, but that time b takes c6 was played in order to chase a tempo on the bishop. Bishop moves, which is again not a good spot for the bishop. You later will see why. So black activates the bishop and protects the pawn. And looking forward, I can say that black finally saved the pawn on f4. So both players are activating their pieces. Well, a5 at the same time prevents knight b6, knight d5, but also becomes a weakness too. So c5, opening the bishop, knight goes to g1, queen c7, and bishop f3. So the bishop on c4 would be better, but the bishop on c4 would also be the object of the attack. Here, white just wants to exchange the bishops with bishop f3. So take, and here I have a question. How would you play? How would you play with black? Okay, so while you are trying to answer this question, I am going to comment what Brian written. So what's the difference between the middle game without queens and the end game? Well, I understand the end game as uh, the position with no queens. So every time the queens are exchanged, I consider it to be the end game. However, I think the majority of grandmasters won't agree with me, because to consider the stage of the game to be the end game, some other factors should be taken into account. There is no concrete definition of how many pieces should be off, but it is said that queen and some other pieces are exchanged, and then the position is considered to be the endgame. So I would also add that when the king isn't in danger, it is the endgame. So the queen and a few more pieces are exchanged, and the king is not in a danger. So none of the kings is in a danger. It is the endgame. Well, you can search for a definition in Wikipedia, for example. Okay, so let me actually read it from Wikipedia. This is the end part of a chess game. And sometimes it's impossible to separate the middle game from the end game. Usually the game is passed to the end game when the majority of pieces are exchanged and there are no threats to the kings, which are very common in the middle game. And in the end game, the main idea, the main task of both players is not to checkmate. However, sometimes there can be a mate in net, and you should definitely take advantage of it. So the main idea is not to checkmate, but promote a pawn to a queen, and because of that, get a decisive material advantage. So this is the explanation from Wikipedia, and I think this is the best one. So it's not only when the queens are off, it's also when the queens and a few more pieces are off, and there is no typical for middle game threats to the kings. Okay, fine. So how to play? 95. 95 is the suggestion. To avoid this move, well, I think black played a better move. They played c4, trying to get more space for the queen, to activate the knight, and also to capture the pawn on a5. So b takes c4, queen takes. Rook a4, queen goes back, bishop b2, rook b8, attacking it. And finally, black exchanges the rooks to make the a5 pawn weaker. They finally took it. Now black is a pawn up, knight fd4. This is hanging. It's attacked twice, but knight d5. Okay, so let's go back. So instead of c4, where is it? There is a suggestion of what? 90, well, okay, 95. 95. Rook e5. Well, Paul, I don't think it's a good idea to sacrifice the exchange here. Moreover, they may not take. Okay, so okay, let's say they take. Knight takes e5. Then rook f4 and knight g6. So, well, here they may not take. What about d4? Maybe not d4. Okay, so what about d4 actually? So c takes d4, queen takes d4, knight goes to g. Well, there is also bishop c5, but yeah, there is bishop c5. Bishop c5, queen f4 should be fine. Okay, so this move, this is coming, so I have to play knight d5. Well, it seems that white is not losing here. Something like that. Maybe queen h5. Okay, anyway, so I don't think rook e5 is a good idea, but well, if I don't take, but let's say I play how? Let's say I play this move, rook h5, and then I play d4. What about that? Because my task is to exchange the bishops and take on d4 with the queen. Okay. Okay, so you suggest f3 always. Let me go back to that original variation here, here. So f3 in this position. Pawn takes. Well, g5. Okay, maybe, but it still allows me to simplify the position. Looks like, well, rook e5 isn't the best thing. So c4, there is no need to sacrifice the exchange right away. So what happened? They finally exchanged the rooks to make the a5 pawn weaker. The pawn was lost, then black is trying to save the pawn on e4, white is trying to create some counterplay. Knight e d4, knight e5, queen e2. So there is a pin, queen d7, queen takes e6, but bishop d2. So it's still extra pawn. And finally, in this position, rook d1 was played. So what do you think about... No, 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 not here. So here it was knight d6 first played, rook d8, knight goes to f5. What would you do here? What do you think? It seems that you have one extra pawn. However, you have 4 versus 2 on the king side. So which is a bit complicated because you may not convert them to 2 passed pawns, maybe only to 1 passed pawn. So 93 by Brian. Okay, any other suggestions? Ninety-three. And if 93, you probably want to do what? So g6. Okay, so why I don't like this move? Because of this. And well, if the king, well, knight f7 is still not a big issue. Actually, yeah, it is a big issue. So I can do this, then I can take, and then knight f7 is a problem. Knight f7. So, well, you cannot block on c4. I have this knight attacking, for example, knight c4, knight c4, queen f5, knight takes e5, and white wins. Yeah, looks like knight a3 loses because of queen e2. Okay, your other suggestion is g6. G6 to chase the knight away. What gonna happen in such a case? Maybe still this move. What do you think, guys? Because if this move, yeah, queen e6 seems to be okay, actually. No, then what? I can do this move first, take, then I take on e5. I don't think king h6 is a good move in this position, but at the same time, I don't know how to play against it. Okay, then I take first. F takes e5. And then I may continue with the check and this. And then c4, which is a double attack. So probably 93. Who goes there? So, well, I'm not sure about this position. I think that's actually the king may be in a danger in this case. 97 check first. When? Ah, wait. Actually, yeah, there is queen d5, queen takes, and 97 check. King goes to f8, let's say knight d5, and this move. And then what? Knight f6? Knight f6 should be fine. Yeah, knight f6, and this is a draw. Rook c6, I can just take on f4, for example. Yeah, so this is a draw, right? Queen e2 is a very dangerous move, and you should be accurate with g6. Okay, there was other suggestion. What about king f8 move in this position? Interesting. So because I don't know myself. Is knight f5 coming? Probably. What about... I want to capture here. What do you think about rook f4? Rook f4, knight takes, rook takes. And if queen d6, I play this move. So, yeah, looks like knight a3 isn't a good idea. I think that Smyslov plays the best move. He plays knight f7 because he closes this diagonal as well as tries to attack on here on d6. So if, for example, the game would continue with this move, then knight e3 would work. So because if rook f4, it's knight takes f5, and after rook f5, it's this. And if knight f5, it's just the rook hanging. So here knight e3 would work. Well, queen e2 still seems to be a good move, but rook d1 was played in the game. Now what? What do you think? You have a material advantage of one pawn in this position. So what you can do? What comes to your mind? Rook b8. Okay, so well, this is how you protect the bishop on d2 indirectly. So rook b8, let's say queen c4, your turn. Now 93. So rook b8, queen c4, and knight e3 in this position, which is a queen attack. So queen f7, queen f7, knight f7. No. So this is a must, but then pawn takes. No, this is a bit unpleasant. What else? Knight h6 doesn't make sense. Okay, so maybe queen c4 is a mistake. Okay, let me do queen a2 instead. Yes, and this is how I hang this bishop too, because I cover the b2 square. So it's a kind of a double attack. Now you have two pieces hanging. So it looks like rook b8 is a mistake. If instead you try knight e3 in this position, you gonna lose. Because, well, maybe not. Rook d2, knight f5, and knight e4. Right. Well, you don't lose the game. It's rook b8, and you are still fine. But here Black took a very proper decision. Black decided to pass the game to the end game. Why? Because the end game is completely winning, but you just need to calculate a little bit more. So knight d6, knight takes knight, queen takes. If they want to gain the bishop, they should exchange the queens, right? And then rook goes there, which threatens a check. So probably the bishop has to move, or maybe they instead have to bring the king, which I think is the best idea. Because if they, let's say, bring the rook back, it's knight e3, and well, rook goes to c1, then you can capture, and it's still a mate. So that's why either bishop d4 or king g1. If king g1, then you can do this, and then you gain the other pawn. You're threatening with a fork, as well as the bishop. So bishop moves, and you fork and capture the h2 pawn, which is a completely winning position. So you here, with this exchange, you simplify the position and obtain some initiative, which provides you with a very favorable endgame. Bishop d4 was played in the game. Rook b1 check, the bishop blocks. And now this is a very important moment of the game. There is only one chance for white to play for a win or to create any complications. And this chance is based on what? Who knows? So it's black to move. The knight is hanging on d5, so it's black to move. And the next move of black parries the counter play that white can potentially obtain in this game. f3? Interesting. Okay, f3, pawn takes f3. What's the point? Knight f4, you mean? Okay, so let's take a look at it. Knight f4, well, you prevent the king, but what did you stop? Are you threatening with this move? I think they have rook g2 at least. Maybe the pawn in game is winning for black, but I'm not sure. Well, yes, you're threatening with knight h3 in this position. It's quite obvious. Let's say they play c4, you play knight h3, they play this move, and you gain. Well, now what? Knight f2 doesn't make much sense. So probably take, and take on c4, but this can be a draw. 2 versus 3 with rooks on the board, and on one flank, it is a draw. Yeah, so here we'd better actually keep both pieces on the board because they are much more active comparing to these two. So who can find the counter chance for white to play for a win? At least based on what this counter chance may appear. There is some specific of the position. Yeah, I'm just checking your comments. Mhm. So c4 with a temper. So it's not important that this move is a temper gaining move because we assume the knight goes away, maybe somewhere, I don't know where. But c4, because of this passed pawn, when it comes to c5, black has to defend his position before they decide to convert this pawn majority on the king side. So if there is no such a counterplay like c4, then black is completely winning. So the move that black plays in this position is actually knight c3. Why? Well, it physically, I mean, manually stops the pawn. Second, once the rook goes somewhere, it's knight e2 and the bishop is lost. And because black, when he was passing the game to the end game, saw all these things that he is completely winning once he just does this or captures the pawn on h2 in a different variation. In this line, for example, if you remember, when it's king g1, check king f2 knight e3, which threatens everything. So the bishop has to move, then it's a check, and this pawn is captured, then it's knight g4 coming. Well, here it's definitely winning because of the huge number of pawns. One pawn can be stopped. But here, three, at least two of them become passed pawns. It's a completely winning. Okay, fine. So in bishop d4 variation, it's a check and knight c3, the key move. Well, h3 to try to activate the king, but that doesn't really matter. The pawn is manually stopped. g5, check, king goes there. They try to attack the knight, but the knight moves with a tempo. Bishop f2, rook f1 gaining a tempo. Bishop goes somewhere else, and still on this diagonal, because this diagonal is more open. And if the bishop, let's say, goes somewhere else, there is a checkmating idea with knight g3, rook h1. So that's why for this move, there always should be the defense of rook g4, g1. Oh, black plays h5, and the game is actually over. g4 is the next move, then it's g3, and that's it. So that's why white had to play g4 himself. En passant, king goes there, and after rook e1, they simply resigned. Why? Well, because of this. And then the G pawn is promoted much faster than the C pawn. Okay, now let's go back to the critical moment of the game. This. When here rook d1 was played, no, when knight f7 was played in order to exchange everything. I mean the queens and two knights. So rook goes there, and now knight d6. This queen exchange and passing the game to the end game is not only to convert this pawn majority. It also provides black with initiative. And when black exchanged the queens, he saw that once the position becomes simpler, black can take advantage of the weakness of the first rank and activate their pieces and get a clear winning plan, which he actually did like that. Okay, fine. Let's continue. Let's continue with the second example. This is the fragment. The position looks really weird. So the game, it was Kotov Matanovich game. So it's white to move. What can you say about the position? Oh, except that the position is crazy. So rook takes rook. Well, guys, what do you think? Rook takes rook. Does it lead to a mass exchange? Wait a sec. Actually, I wonder, am I missing something? So take, isn't it a mate? Ah, maybe the queen takes here, but then it's just queen a2. So this is an example where this rook g8 leads to a simple win. Well, wait a sec. Is it really the fragment from the game between Kotov and Matanovich? Why didn't they? Ah, no, it's just one of the variations. This exact position didn't happen in the game, but this is just one of the variations. So it looks like I found a simple win. It's rook g8 and the mate after that. Or if queen takes, this queen is pinned and queen a2 is possible. Okay, however, I would like to talk about something else. So what about the end game? So let's say we swap everything. Why in this position the end game is completely winning? Who can tell me? Mm-hmm. So it's quite easy to evaluate this in game because the king is inside the square of the pawn. So for those of you who don't remember how to draw the square of the pawn, so now it's black to move. Let's draw it. So we do this. We move diagonally to the queen line. So to b1 and g1. Then we connect these two. Then we connect it with g6 because it's on the because it's on the side where the b pawn is located. It's on the sixth rank where the b pawn is located. And if the king is inside of the square of the pawn, it can simply stop. Also, so one more. Oh, it's actually white to move even. If it was black to move, the king is still inside of the square of the pawn with king f1. Well, f4 should be fine, but king f1, we do not need to rush. What should we do in this position? So let's say this f4, king c5, king c3. So we hold their position. On this side, we create a protected passed pawn. Not just a passed pawn, no, let's say h5, so we do not play this move. Of course we don't, because then the king comes closer and captures this pawn. We first need to play h3. Let's say b5 or king d5. Well, then we play this move. Take. And once he comes closer, f5. Now the f5 pawn, the g4 pawn is immune to be captured because once the king takes it, the f pawn is promoted. For example. So king g4, this. But the b pawn is alone and it is captured anyway. So the king captures it. So you just need to create a protected pass pawn on the king side, which is quite obvious because you have 3 versus 1 and your pawn structure is really good. Okay, fine. So let's continue. I think the second example is quite similar. Well, we will quickly go through the opening stage of the game because this is not our topic today. So it was Najdorf. Bishop g5 in order to exchange on f6 and fight for the d5. Knight d7, a4, b6, because b5 is not possible. a4 was actually a novelty that time. Queen e2, rook fd1, rook fc8, knight goes to d2 to protect the bishop, and it's better to keep the bishop on this diagonal. h6, bishop has to take. Bishop b3, and the idea is to relocate the knight to e3 through c4 or through e3, or through f1. Bishop c6, knight goes to c4, and in this position, black decided to take on e4, which does make sense, actually. After that, he plays d5. So what do you think was the best reaction for white? Well, it seems that they lose a piece back, but let's at least grab one pawn. How would you play here? Knight b6, queen b6, and then bishop d5. And what about the pawn on b2? Okay. So knight d2, knight cd2. I like actually knight cd2. I also think that this move is fine. Then queen h5 with some ideas. Because the pawn blocks the bishop. Of course, they do not lose the material right away, so they probably play this move. After which, should we continue with knight d5, or what do you think? Or knight f5? The g6 definitely doesn't work. So maybe with this move, because if we only play queen g6, we are threatening both pawns. Yeah, so this is interesting. Maybe bishop f8 first, and we play knight g4. This is hanging, so bishop e8, queen g6, threatening with mate, as well as h6 is hanging, so they go there, we take on e4. Yeah, it looks fine. Black has a bishop pair, but look at these bishops. They now have to defend the position. And this is a weakness. And f6 make the bishop on f8 really bad. So yeah, something like that. Or something like knight b6, queen b6, but then knight c3, attacking this center. Because if d4, it's knight d5. And if we play this in game, because of the weakness on f7, we may get more advantage. Queen e5. Bishop b3. So white is a pawn up, and there is a chance to initiate the attack. So, but Larsen made a mistake. He played a5. D takes c4, queen c4, attacking f7, rook f8. A takes b6, queen takes b6, knight d6 was played. And, well, this is a blunder because of the pin. Then a6 is also vulnerable. Well, I'll just show you. So look at this position. This is a threat. This is a threat. How to defend on c6. If this rook moves, it's just queen f7. So bishop d6, they play bishop b5 and exchange their bishop for the knight. Then the queen has to move, attacking a5, rook a1, and bishop c5. Your suggestion? So white has an attack of f7, black has attack of the f2. Okay, Brian, please explain. Do you want to sacrifice the pawn on f2? Why? Ah, you mean king f1 first? Wait a sec. So king f1, you let them take without a check, and then rook a8. Well, okay, so king f1, let's say bishop takes, rook a8, queen f6. And I protect f7 as well as I threaten with some discovery check with my bishop. Okay, what other suggestions do you have here? So Paul suggests queen f3. Okay, interesting. But well, the idea is rook a8. And if we, let's say, give an extra tempo for white, I think white wins the game. But what if they start with this? So how to play? If you take, it's bishop f2. King h1, bishop d4. The bishop f6 to block the attack, maybe. There is also back rank weak. If, let's say, in this position you play queen f5, maybe e3 works. What's your opinion? Yeah, maybe e3 works. Well, f3 is risky. So f takes, bishop takes, king h1. And, well, queen d4. Queen b5 actually works. And queen b2 is a blunder. Okay. So king h1, how to play in this position? Maybe, or maybe just b4. B4, yeah. And then maybe bishop d4. Why not? Because if you play rook f1 to add more pressure, okay, I'm fine with it. I can continue with this move. I can let you take, but after king h8 move, looks like you are pinned. And b2 is still vulnerable. And even if you play b3 and we just exchange the queens in this position, it still can be the end game. Well, then queen d3. Okay, no. Queen f6 is not accurate thing. So let me play something else. Queen c5? Yeah, queen c5. And the end game with bishops of the opposite color should be a draw, even without a pawn. Okay, so what was played in the game? Rook a8, definitely yes. And then, well, if they take, it's queen takes a8, king f7, and bishop f7, threatening the mate. That's why this check on f2 isn't dangerous. And if, let's say, this move, then it's queen e8. And now two pawns are hanging. And if queen f6, for example, which protects both, it's queen takes b5. So that's why they played this move. King goes to f1, not to the h1, just to here, and queen f6. So similar to what Brian suggested, but with a different move order. Now what? Black is about to play with their bishop to d4, for example, maybe to g3, and exchange the queens. Because after this bishop goes let's say here it's queen f2 coming. So that's why I 100% sure that this is the move. So you may exchange the rooks first, but how to play then? Okay, well, guys, please suggest your moves and also try to explain why you want to play this move. So, for example, Paul suggests queen takes f7. Paul, what's the purpose of queen f7? Well, of course, they take with the queen. What do you have in mind? Swap everything, okay. So exchange everything, and then yes. So let's say this bishop takes. No, queen f7, bishop takes, king takes, rook, check, king takes, king f2. Is it a winning pawn in game? Because the material is equal. Okay. Okay. So Paul thinks that this is a winning pawn in game. But which factor tells you about it? No, Georgios thinks that it's not. E5 is weak. No, it's not about E5. Okay, guys. So actually, Paul was correct. Yes, but okay, let me explain. You are correct, but not particularly. So there is some feature or some indicator which tells that this in game is completely winning even without calculations. So let me explain. Definitely queen f7. Queen f7, then if we take the rook, they take with the king, and no, because the queen is pinned, so they take with the king, we take there. This is a draw, because they just continue with this move. Well, if c3, I think they just take on c3 and take on f7. So that's why we have to retreat our bishop somewhere, maybe to b3, and this is a draw, and actually we are a pawn down. But this is a draw, don't worry. So that's why bishop f7 first, because the rook is pinned, they have to capture with the king. And then rook f8 is a check too, and this is how we exchange bishops too. And this in game is winning because well, 2 versus 1 on the queen side, but why do we win? Because of that factor. We win because this is how we create an outside passed pawn. So our task is to convert these two to the passed pawn on c4, which will distract the king while we capture the e5 pawn and we are closer to the king side. So I can, without any calculations, I can definitely say that white has a winning plan in this position. They win because they create an outside passed pawn, which attracts the enemy king, well, which distracts the king out of the place of action and allows white to capture the central pawn and enter the enemy camp on the king side much faster. So there are some accuracy should be shown in this position. For example, king d6, king f4, and b4, which is a very good move. And for example, okay, yeah, okay, let's say, no, let's say they played king e6. What would you continue here? This is a critical question. Well, maybe g4, yeah, but if we are talking about queen side play, which move on the queen side you think you should start with? C3, right. So definitely not b3, because making the b3 move with the idea of doing c4, which seems quite fast, allows black to play b4 and fix our pawn structure. Now, once we create a passed pawn, we let them take en passant, and they also have a passed pawn. So that's why c3, b3, and only then fix the position there and play c4. So this is the most common way. So if they go to e6, we advance further, attracting the king. If they take, we take, and then we just grab the queen, the king side totally. Well, the game continued with b4, c3, b3, c4, and it's still a winning position. So here, one important thing, king e5, king c5. How should we play in this position? Hmm? Who knows? Okay, so here on YouTube, Mitchell suggests to play king e4. Well, Brian also suggests king e4. Well, guys, that would be a critical mistake because when after king c4, your king is shouldered away. King e3, king d5. And if this, then he goes to that flank. So you have to repeat the position. Okay, so here Devi Tank suggests king f5, and that is the best option. Why? Because if king takes c4 right away, it's king f4, and you are shouldering your opponent from the b3 pawn, which you can now capture and make the b pawn as an outside passed pawn. Not, of course, king g5, because you let them take your b2 pawn and get his b pawn promoted. So king d4, king f4. So we still continue with shouldering. And now if they play this move, we advance the c pawn and promote it faster. And this is a winning position. So we just need to take on h5, and maybe we want to sacrifice the queen for the b pawn, but it's not needed. We can instead just bring the king and checkmate. So you probably know that a draw can be achieved with this, and these pawns. With a, c, f, h, and if it's b, d, e, or g, then white is winning regardless of where the king is. I'm talking about if there are no h pawns. If there are h pawns, it's a winning position anyway. So king f4, king c5, king f5 shouldering, and king f4, and we go and capture the pawn on b3, and then they just resign because what they can do. So it's even on h3, but we cover it, and we can also do this if we need. So this is how white won the game. But let's go back to the critical moment of the game and decide because of what white was able to win the game. So here, the material is completely equal, right? So in this position, but white has a better pawn structure. They have two pawn islands. In case if the f pawn is removed, then black has three pawn islands, which is a worse pawn structure. But the key idea is that these two pawns are connected, which means that a passed pawn can be created on the queen side. And because of that, the endgame is completely winning. So a better pawn structure was converted I mean, a better pawn structure as well as the white's queen activity provided white with a positional advantage that they could realize in the end game. Okay, fine. So now let's continue with the second part of our, the third part of our webinar, and I would like to talk about the game between Laios Portish and Anatoly Karpov. Well, the opening stage of the game isn't important for us. That's why we can quickly go through it. So white got an isolated pawn, but their pieces are more active. They control a5, and potentially they may initiate the attack on the king side, which they later tried. Knight c6, a3, bishop e7, bishop c2 in order to play queen d3. So rook e8, queen d3, rook c8, and d5. Now, the main idea is to distract this knight. So if knight d5, for example, it's a mate on h7, then queen h8. So e takes d5 and bishop g5 with the idea to liquidate it. If, for example, the game continued with g6, who can tell me which tactical strike white would apply? Yes, it's definitely rook takes e7. Rook takes e7. Now what? If this or this takes, it's just bishop f6, two minor pieces for rook and the pawn, and the completely winning position. But if the queen takes, then we exploit this pin by playing knight d5 and then take on f6. So knight e4. This is the only way to close the diagonal and avoid material losses. Knight takes, pawn takes, queen takes. It's still a mating threat, but g6. Queen h4. Pressuring here. So, for example, this is what is coming, and then h7 becomes a weakness. Well, h5 because of that. White could try playing bishop b3 in this position, increasing the pressure on f7, but they continued with rook a d1, queen c7, and this is an important moment of the game. It seems that white definitely has an advantage. Even after this rook a d1, the position is completely winning. So g4, you think? I think g4 is not the best option here. G4, we take. You want to take with the knight. Then I would like to exchange maybe. Right? Then I want to play knight d4. Knight f5, because I want to do this and that. No, g4 weakens the position. Okay, so for Portish, it seemed that he played the winning tactical strike. He played bishop g6. F takes g6. And actually, yes, here he could continue with rook e6, trying to capture here. For example, if let's say king f7 is played, then it's what do you think? Almost anything. I think this is a good move, pressuring here and here simultaneously, so that eliminates this move. Queen c4 may work, so it's a completely winning position. But he played queen c4, which in his opinion was a good move. However, it's not the end. King g7, bishop f4, and this is the critical moment of the game. So because with this idea, queen c4 check and bishop f4, here, Portish thought that he traps the queen, and in order to avoid the queen loss, they should sacrifice something and escape. And that at least provides white with an extra pawn. But there was something he missed. What do you think? What did he miss? Maybe it's b5? Because if queen takes b5, it's queen takes f4. Who knows? So b5, queen b5, queen takes f4, queen takes b7. Okay, let's make this moves. Queen b5, queen takes here, queen takes b7. Well, looks like white. Uh-huh. Okay, so no, black is okay here. So, for example, queen c7 back. Everything seems to be protected. There is a bishop for 2 pawns. Okay, but the problem is that here they have queen c3 move. And then after bishop f6, bishop takes c7, bishop takes c3, rook takes e8, rook takes e8, and this is bishop is not hanging. After b takes e3, it's extra pawn for white. So here Anatoly Karpov found such a move like bishop a6, which has a similar idea, but works much better than b5. So if, for example, queen a6 is just an exchange of the bishops, and black is a piece up for 2 pawns. If queen c3, then this time bishop f6 works. Why? Okay, let's discuss. Take, rook e8, rook takes e8, b takes c3. But here, yes, we are a pawn down, but we can play bishop e2 move. And after rook e1, it's just rook c8. So we are about to take here and take advantage of these pawns being already ruined. Because if the pawn structure is ruined on that side, then 3 against 2 do not win. Rook e2, rook c7. So that was the best thing that white could do in order to play for a win. Rook e6. Well, here, they, for example, they cannot play this move. It's a back rank mate. So they play rook e6, knight d8. This is hanging, so they have to go back. And That's why the game here ended in a draw, because there is no winning plan for white. They tried to activate the king, but the black's position was strong enough. So g3 stops this move. However, if black exchanges more pawns, the position becomes more drawing. h3, knight c5, knight d2, this. So entering the enemy camp, and if they exchange, it is a draw 100%. So for example, you could continue with, what do you think, with which move? Maybe just rook c7 is enough here. Because if c4, king goes there, and then king goes here. Rook d5, fine, we just go back, and it's still hanging. So king e2 was played, rook d5, and h4 trying to exchange. So check, king e7, rook h8, h takes g3, f takes g3, and this is where they agreed to a draw, because white had, because white pawns are weak, and this is a knight endgame. So even, for example, let's say these 3 pawns are exchanged for these 3, all black need is just to sacrifice their knight for the h pawn. And it is a theoretical draw, because a rook and the knight do not win against a rook if there are no pawns on the board. So in our case, let's go back to this position. With bishop g6 and this maneuver, Portish thought that he wins the game. However, he missed that there is bishop a6. Maybe he saw this move, but just didn't evaluate properly the endgame. So here, with such a king being extremely weak, passing the game to the endgame saved the game for black. So Karpov managed to save the game with this maneuver. If he tried b5, it wouldn't work so well, because this time the bishop is a bit passive. And rook d7 is coming. So you can actually do rook d7 first, and then do this. Rook e7. No, okay, let's not do this. Let's just take on c3 right away. And then maybe rook d7 at a certain moment. This is where these pieces are passive, and the b5 pawn is a weakness. But with bishop a6, it works really well because of the ability of the bishop to go to e2 and create a fork. If let's say rook d7 in this position with a check, just king f6. And well, this bishop can move with a temper, threatening the mate if the knight moves away. If not, then this is coming. So for example, knight d4, knight b5, and we are threatening with this. Okay. Fine, guys. Well, this is that's all for the webinar today. What can I say from my own experience? It's more common when I exchange the queens in order to avoid the attack to my king and to realize my material or positional advantage. But mainly, I exchange the queens to avoid complications to my king's position. If I see that the king is in a danger, or if I see that without queens on the board, I am completely winning. So these are 2 main cases: to save the king, or if I see that the endgame is completely winning. However, you know that you can pass the game to the end game if you don't know how to realize the material advantage right now, but you are likely to get more chances to do it in the end game, as well as if you think that your positional advantage in the end game provides you with better chances. Okay, so I think next webinar, I'm going to change the link for our meeting. So that's why, guys, I want you to register once again. So the same link may not work. Just register once again, and you will receive an email with a new link. Well, that's all for today. Do you have any questions? Okay, fine, guys. So see you next Sunday, same time. I'll send you an email about what the next webinar will be. And by the way, guys, do you mind if we start, let's say, 30 minutes earlier and make our webinar longer? What about this idea? What do you think in mind? What do you have in mind? Well, if we start at, let's say, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time, so 30 minutes earlier. Okay, let me think actually myself. Maybe not next week, but the week after. Okay, fine. So see you next Sunday.